I'm someone who served a 24-year, 8-month sentence for conspiracy to commit murder for hire, attempted murder and robbery. And I just got released from prison on July 21st.
You're listening to Life on the Outside. It's a podcast about what it's like to get out of prison after decades of incarceration. This is episode 36. It's our last one of 2020. We didn't do an interview because COVID is really bad here in Los Angeles, so instead we're playing for you a radio piece about COVID-19 in California prisons. I produced this piece and it aired December 2nd on KCRW.
Eileen is one of thousands of Californians getting out of prison early during the pandemic. Back in March, the state worked quickly to release 3,500 inmates. Today, that number has jumped to over 17,000. But Eileen's release story is a bit different from most of the other newly freed.
I'm someone who served a 24-year, 8-month sentence for conspiracy to commit murder for hire, attempted murder and robbery. And I just got released from prison on July 21st.
Most prisoners getting out early qualify under new pandemic rules. Eileen doesn't, because he committed a violent crime. Instead, he's out now because he had already been found suitable for parole, and the state moved up his date. So how is the state of California making these decisions about who stays in and who gets out? And should people like Eileen be kept in prison, or should they be the first in line to get out? Reporter Lucy Copp has the story.
Let's go back to late May, right before San Quentin Prison would be splashed across national headlines as the site of the worst COVID outbreak in the country.
It hadn't exploded yet. When I say exploded, I mean chaos in general.
Eileen remembers when things took a sudden turn. San Quentin had been able to stave off the virus all spring. But that changed in June when the state decided to transfer 121 men from a hotspot prison in Chino to San Quentin. This transfer is now considered the most botched and deadly transfer in state history.
I very distinctly remember that around the 18th, guys said, hey, there's a little cold going around the building. And usually when you hear that in San Quentin or most prisons, by the time you hear it, you probably already got it.
The virus exploded, and it quickly became clear that the prison could no longer separate the positive cases from the negative ones.
They realized that they were running out of room. There's so many people that are positive. We can't keep taking the positive guy and sending him to Badger and then the negative cellie and sending him to Alpine. We don't have enough room for that.
Officers began calling out of work, afraid for their own lives. Nurses were short-staffed, and Eileen's building of 780 men were losing patience.
They're neglecting things like our showers, medications coming late. And so, this is how things are starting to deteriorate.
Then Eileen's cellmate tested positive for COVID-19. Eileen quickly got it too, but had mild symptoms. He listened to the echoes of people calling man down, sometimes 2 to 3 times a day.
We're in there in our cells watching TV, and we're seeing guys that just got released protesting for us, saying, let them go. You're killing them in there. Get them some help.
On June 29th, Governor Newsom addressed the crisis at a televised news conference.
We are committed to meeting our responsibilities within CDCR, and moreover, as we release prisoners, the impact that will have outside of...
When I saw him start to stumble over his words and start making promises about we're going to reduce the population. I promise you I'm going to get... I was flabbergasted. I said, this is having an effect.
The state decided to release 8,000 more incarcerated people on top of the 3,500 who were already released early in the spring. If you had 180 days left on your sentence for a non-violent crime, you qualified. If you were medically high risk and had a year left on your sentence for a non-violent crime, you qualified. The governor's focus was on so-called non-nons, those in prison for non-serious, non-violent, non-sexual crimes. Eileen did not qualify, but should he have?
Well, we're not taking into consideration if a person has been in prison for 20 years and they've gone through all of these rehabilitative programs, and they haven't committed a violent offense in the past 20 years or 15 years, they're no longer a violent offender.
That's Sam Lewis, director of the Anti-Recidivism Coalition. I should note, I produce a podcast called Life on the Outside that is partnered with this organization. Lewis's point is that most incarcerated people who have life sentences and then qualify for release qualify because they are no longer likely to be violent. Lifers have the lowest recidivism rate of any group of formerly incarcerated people, at under 1%. They also tend to be older, adding to the unlikelihood they'll reoffend. On the other hand, their age puts many of them at high risk for COVID-related complications.
Lifers usually know themselves better than any of us out here will ever know ourselves. They have had to look at their lives in a really deep manner.
Vanessa Nelson-Sloan is the director of Lifer Support Alliance. She says if you have a life sentence, you need to earn your freedom. And you do that by gaining insight into your crime, showing remorse, and taking full responsibility. This is part of the reason the recidivism rate amongst lifers is so low. But, she says, the public sees it differently.
The public has a really warped perception of prisoners, but lifers in particular. They seem to see all of these folks as totally bloodthirsty, unaccountable murderers with no remorse. And that is not the case.
Back in 2008, a California Supreme Court case considered this question. Should people serving life sentences for violent crimes be considered for release if they no longer present a danger to society? The court answered yes, ruling in favor of the release of someone like Aline. That's part of the reason why in the last decade, more lifers in California are being found suitable for parole and released back into society than ever before. But victims and crime survivor groups have been rattled by this trend.
Victims and survivors and family members are devastated.
That's Patricia Wenskunas. She runs the Crime Survivors Resource Center, and she's witnessing firsthand how these early releases are alarming crime survivors.
We've been contacted by many recently saying they were getting early release notices, and so they're triggered, they're traumatized, they're having night terrors, they're not sure what to do, even though, yes, maybe this person did serve their time, but that doesn't mean that that person now is not going to come after that person. There's no guarantee either way.
Wenskunas says that with the momentum shifted towards rehabilitation, victims' voices are left unheard.
It's all about the offender, the rehabilitation. No, it's not. It's about the victim.
Nelson Sloan from Lifer Support Alliance has compassion for this perspective too.
My husband and I are both relatives and survivors of violent crime. You can't say to victims, get over it, because you never get over it, and I understand that.
But, she says,
we have to follow the law.
It's really individual to individual. And there's a lot of guys that are ready to go home. And I think that if someone looked at a lot of people's records, especially like when we were all in San Quentin, if someone had started going over files, they could have picked a whole bunch of people that could have been lifers that could have been let go.
In November 2019, Aline was found suitable.
And luckily, at San Quentin, I was going to college, gaining analytical reading skills and writing skills. And I applied that to the self-help group material. And I had some very poignant moments in groups where I realized the totality of the harm I had done to someone.
His change and growth made him, in the eyes of the commissioners, no longer a threat and safe to return home. But he had no release date. Then in July, as San Quentin was reeling from the COVID outbreak, Aline was told to pack up his cell. After 24 years of incarceration, he was going home.
So 2 officers come to the door, and they're like, "You're Aline, right?" And I'm like, "Yeah." I said, "Where are we going now? Upstairs?" They go, "Hell no. We're going to LA. You ready?" And I was like, "What do you mean we're going to LA? Dude, we're about to put you in the car. You're going to LA to your quarantine hotel right now. Do you need to go to the bathroom?" I was like, "Hell no, let's go."
Aline hopped into a van that sped over the San Rafael Bridge, across the San Francisco Bay.
Even though you're in San Quentin and you see the water just looks so beautiful. I swear I sat there the entire 5-hour ride to LA, just looking out the window.
He checked into his travel lodge for 2 mandatory weeks of quarantine.
Well, when they first shut the door, I made sure that they were far away, and I went, yes! And I jumped on the bed a couple times, on my back, like I can't believe it.
Alain has been out for 4 months now. He's looking forward to getting licensed as a truck driver. And when I asked him what the best part of freedom is, he didn't hesitate.
Obviously, hugging my mom for the first time, I was just totally in tears. It just pulls on my heartstrings.
As California struggles to contain COVID inside prisons, Alain and other lifers hope the state will look beyond the most politically palatable releases of nonviolent offenders and consider those with long-term sentences too. For KCRW, I'm Lucy Copp. Thank you so much for listening to this latest episode of Life on the Outside, our last one of 2020. Thanks to everyone who's listened to this podcast, who shared this podcast, who supported us. And if you want to follow us, we're on Instagram at LOTO_podcast. You can also support us by visiting our Patreon account. It's patreon.com/Life on the Outside. It's a place where people can give. You can become a monthly member if you want to financially support this podcast. Thank you again so much. Thank you to all of our storytellers. My name's Lucy, and we'll see you next year. Take care.